All right, well, I'm Charlie Bright from Z-Axis. We're a leak tester and positive displacement pump vendor. This slideshow here is mostly about leak testing. So when it comes to leak testing, there's basically two things that everyone's trying to do. You're trying to keep liquid inside your part or keep liquid from getting inside your part. So there's a couple different ways we test it. Like you see, like the watch, nowadays there's so much stuff that's waterproof. Cell phones, GPS antennas, watches, all kinds of stuff. We do a lot of like electrical boxes that maybe sit on a generator, it's outside, or solar panel, power control unit, stuff like that. And there's no way to actually plug into a sealed part like that and pressurize it from the inside to see if you have a leak. So what we do is we take that part, we make a negative of the part in a nest and just place the part in the nest, seal it up, and we'll put air around it. And if the air disappears, the only place it could have gone is inside your part, and that's how our tester sees it. We call that a chamber test. And we get probably 5, 6 new applications like that a week now, just because everything's waterproof. If there is a bunch of dead space inside it, which is kind of rare because they make everything super small nowadays. It's usually filled up, right 95% inside. But if there is a bunch of dead space inside it, then we can just do the same thing. We make a negative and we just do a quick vacuum pull. If we lose vacuum, the only reason it could have happened is because air came out from inside the part and we see it. Other parts, when we have a way to actually get air inside it, that's how we do it. It's our normal pressure decay or vacuum decay test, and it's not considered a chamber test. Long story short, we're a very fancy tire gauge. So we're just filling your part up, whatever pressure you need it to be at, and then we measure very precisely how much decay is coming out of that. And we can see 5 digits deep of a PSI. It's pretty hard to be repeatable after about the 4th digit. You can stand, say this is the tester, you could stand next to it and just your body heat will actually change that because the sensor is very, very sensitive and it will see that change. So being that sensitive that's kind of irrelevant. Once you get down to like the 4th digit, you're kind of getting into the mass spec. And that's where they'll fill the part up with helium and then have a little sniffer and go around it and try to see where the air is leaking out of. Kind of like, HVAC guys doing stuff like that. So what we're doing, this is just the test volume. So that's all the air that we're putting inside your part. And it doesn't matter if it's positive air or vacuum decay. This is just the volume inside the part. So it's either positive pressure or it's drawn down as a vacuum. And then we shut the supply off and we're just looking for that little tiny bit that's trying to leak out. And whatever that decay is over the amount of time, that's where you set your limit. And if it reaches that limit anytime in your test time, the tester stops, gives you the red light, says the part's bad, and we dump all that data out so you know that the part either gets scrapped or thrown away, or in some cases you can actually fix the part and then run it back through and do a test again.
Can I ask a question?
You bet. Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to make it difficult. Is it possible there are situations that it's leaking air, but it doesn't leak liquid?
Absolutely. Yes, because air molecules are a lot smaller than a liquid molecule. So everything's going to leak a little bit of air. You take a steel cylinder that's been welded up, we'll probably find a little bit of air that can sneak out through the welds and the cracks. But that doesn't mean that, that hole's big enough that liquid can get into your part. And we do a lot of stuff where we'll go to an old place where they've been pressurizing their part, dunking it in water, and they see bubbles, like, oh, it must be bad, they throw it away. That's just the old school way of doing it, and it worked. But a lot of those guys have no clue that, the air molecule's smaller, liquid molecule's bigger, just because you're getting air out of that. Doesn't, exactly. So we'd go and, they'd have a bunch of parts and we'd run them, and we're like, well, that's not gonna, it's not gonna ingest water. And they're like, man, we've been throwing away good parts for years because they didn't know any better. Like a little bubble formed, must be bad, and they would toss it. So yes, absolutely. And most, especially in the, the automotive and the medical world, they usually have a leak spec, especially if it's some sort of part that's been around. They're like, okay, we've got a 1.5 cc leak. That's, if it leaks that much, we know that's a hole big enough that water is going to get into it, and they'll tell us that. So then we'll just make a leak standard that's 1.5 cc's at their test pressure, and then you can run a good part, plug that leak standard in, and see what your decay is. That way okay, this is where we're going to set the limit. We know what a good part is, we know what a bad part is. A lot of people have, startup companies, they make a brand new part, they have no clue if it's good or bad. and they just luck out. The first 1,000 parts they make are all perfectly good. And they're like, well, how do we know? What do we do? And we're like, well, what's the end use gonna be? What's it gonna see? And the biggest thing, like if it's holding liquid inside, the big thing people wanna know is like, what if like an airplane loses cabin pressure? Because say they fill up a vial or a medical syringe, whatever it is, at sea level. So there's 14.7 PSI of pressure inside their part. They put a seal over it, everything's good. Now they load it in a crate, it goes on an airplane, it's at 40,000 feet, and for some reason they lose cabin pressure. Up at 40,000 feet, the air pressure, atmospheric pressure is like 7 PSI. Now you have a big, huge pressure difference. So now you have all this pressure inside the part trying to get out. So that's usually where they want to do the check to make sure that if that happens, that doesn't rupture. Because say the crate on the case on top of the crate, that opens up, leaks a little bit, the drug contaminates the whole crate, now the whole thing's coming back. God knows how much it's gonna cost them, it'd be a lot. So, yep, that's the big thing. This is how the inside of our testers are. So you have air supply coming in. This is just the wall in the lab, in your shop, whatever it is. We have a regulator, either a manual regulator or an electronic regulator. So if it's a manual, you just turn that knob and get it to right where you want it. Say you want 10 PSI or 200 PSI, whatever the number is, that regulator is set to that. And then we open both valves, all the air flows through, fills your part up. Now that part's filled up, we shut these valves down. The only thing that's left in the whole test circuit is the product, your part, and from this valve forward. So for us, this is our pressure transducer, and this is like the front of the tester. That little bit of space right there is only 0.8 cc's. That's the smallest in the industry. That's what allows us to make pressure decay or vacuum decay tests very fast and very repeatable. We understand time's money. Everyone's going automation, or even if they're not, if you have the intern sitting at a desk all day and you're like, you can't go home until you test 200 parts, the faster you can get through that, the better. But you have to stay repeatable. So that's the biggest thing you can do, is have a small volume to make pressure decay tests go really fast. So that's us. We turn those down, both those valves are closed. And then this sensor monitors any air leaving your product over that test time. So we show a graph. Now, more and more people are starting to do that. The nice thing about the graph is you can see what your part's actually doing. So say you're at R&D and like you come up with this new part, maybe a catheter, could be a car part, might be something for hunting, whatever the case is, you have no idea how it's gonna react. So you just, all right, let's fill it for 2 seconds. You know, so just for easy numbers, say this is 10 PSI. That's what you want in your part. As soon as that line goes up there and makes the turn, okay, now you know you have 10 PSI inside your part, and that's the fill step. If the part is soft, if it has compliance, which almost everything has some sort of compliance to it, once you fill that part up, it's gonna keep expanding. Now it's like blowing up a party balloon. You know, you blow it up to a certain size, and then you stop and you hang on to it, it's gonna keep stretching a little bit. All parts do that. And while it is stretching and doing that, the volume inside is increasing, which means your pressure is decreasing. Now there's not a leak tester in the world that knows the difference. Maybe there's a big hole in it, maybe it's stretching like a balloon, it just knows the pressure is dropping inside that part. So just because you're filled up to pressure right here, that doesn't mean shut the timer off and hurry up and jump into settle time and get to your test time, because that part would keep expanding and the pressure would keep dropping. So you'll have a little bit of extra fill time. We're at 10 PSI, say this is like 2 seconds, 2 seconds, 2 seconds, just for easy numbers. You fill it, even though we filled up in, you know, half a second, a quarter of a second, we filled it for the rest of the time. So that took the compliance out. As that part's stretching, you still have the supply going into the part. So you're still at 10 PSI. That's what you want. Because at the end of the day, when you get over here to your actual test time, you want to see how much air is leaking out of that part while there's 10 PSI in it. So it filled it up. The settle or stabilization time is just, you know, if it's still moving a little bit, you want that to stop. And then the test time, this is where you really fine look. We can see, you know, like up to 5 digits deep of how much air is leaking out of that part. If that part is expanding, like say you cut this is the 2 second stable time or settle time. Say you turn that to 1 second. So that would move this line back to here. If that part was still stretching a little bit, once you get to the test time, you're going to see that in your decay. So maybe a good part leaked out a whole 1 psi because you ran the test really fast, you didn't give it a chance to stabilize and settle. That's okay if that part decays a lot more than 1 psi when it's actually got a hole in it. So that's where people go through the validation. Run good parts, get a big window between good and bad, and then you can start speeding up all your timers. As you do that, that window is going to start to close. Now, we recommend like a 3x difference between a good and a bad part. That way you should probably never pass a bad part or fail a good part. Some people, time's money. They're a startup company, they can only afford one tester, but if they don't get 50 units out the door every day, they're going to go broke and their belly up. So they'll speed the test up and they'll go much, much faster than they should. And like their good parts and bad parts will be really similar. Now that's a gamble. You can do that, but we don't recommend it. Obviously once the companies get bigger and they have more budget, they can afford to have more testers online. They can have a huge difference because they can afford to test longer. Like they know for sure they'll never have a recall. So that's where it's a little bit of a gamble. So we have the tolerance that runs along with the test pressure. So that does a couple things. So like you're wanting to fill at 10 psi in your part, we tell the tester we're going to 10 psi, and you'll see we have a screenshot of the actual screen of our tester here in the next couple slides. You can set that tolerance. So it does a couple things. Say over the nighttime someone unplugged you from the air compressor, or the air compressor is in a different room, you can't even tell if it's running or not. So you hit start, the tester is trying to put 10 psi in that part. If it can't get there, there's one of two things. Someone messed with your regulator or your air compressor is turned off, or there's a huge hole in your part so you can't even get the thing up to pressure. Either way, the tester's not going to waste his time and keep on going for a bogus test. So it stops at the end of the fill step and gives you a warning and says low pressure. Something's wrong. Someone adjusted the regulator, or there's no air pressure. Maybe you're unplugged from the wall. Whatever the case is, there's no point in moving on. It's really bad. The plus tolerance will also catch. So say you run a 10 psi on your part, but maybe 15 psi harms your part. It opens it up a little bit, it stretches it, it cracks it, whatever the case is, it's not a good part anymore. So on that tolerance, for any reason during your fill step, say the intern walked by and bumped your regulator and turned it up a little bit and you didn't know it, if it reaches past the plus tolerance, it stops again for safety and says high pressure. Something's changed, whether it was the parameters or somebody bumped something, it gives you safety so you don't actually overpressurize your part and make a bomb, one, hurt the part, or turn it into a bomb. You got shrapnel flying all over. So the tolerances are always a good safety. Other than the tolerance, these are the 5 numbers you'll only ever change in our tester. Your fill time, your settle time, and your test time. And that was the 3 stages we saw in that graph. Once those 3 are figured out, the only thing that really matters is your reject level. If the part reaches the reject level, you get a red light, it's bad, throw it away and move on. If it doesn't reach that in your test time, you get a green light, the part's good, goes in the good bin, grab another part and keep testing. The vent time, what we do after the test is over, we open up one valve inside the tester and the vent, the pressure from inside your part just travels back through, goes out to atmosphere from inside our tester, so it's fine. If you have real low pressure on your part or there's no volume in it, you can just save that vent time, just leave it at 0. Like these guys, when they'll put a bunch of our testers in automation and they're running 10, 15 parts at a time, there's a lot more going on than just the leak test. So there's something coupled up to it. When the test is over, they uncouple, the air will just shoot out. It goes, psh, who cares? Makes a little sound, doesn't even matter, then move on. You're not wasting time, like, even a second in the vent time to let the air out of your part. Over the course of a year, that's a lot of time. Again, time's money, we get that. So we give you all the tools to shave time off wherever you can. If you're doing like 100 PSI and like a catheter balloon or something weird, so you had a big bunch of volume, then you probably want a vent. Otherwise, you unhook it from the tester, that thing's gonna take off and leave the table like a bottle rocket and you have to go chase it down. So some parts would require an actual vent time, others do not. Depends on how the part reacts and how much pressure you have inside it.
I have a question.
Yep.
So for the amount of time to fill the valves, like, does the airflow, amount of airflow going in, does it impact the result?
Yes, because,
How fast the air goes in?
well, excuse me. we'll have different size valves with different size orifices to help fill that up. Because at the end of the day, you want to test fast. If the part has a lot of compliance, you can't change physics. It is what it is. We've been trying for years. It's impossible. You can't do it. But what we can do is the faster you get that part up to pressure and blown up, the faster you start removing compliance from it. The faster you get compliance removed, the faster you can get to your test, you can get your result, and you can move on to the next part. So that's where we'll start to play with it, especially with automation. And like nowadays, everyone's testing bottles. There's a bottle for every type of surgery, people wearing bottles, if their liver doesn't work, for kidneys, there's so many reasons for it. And it's like blowing up a balloon. You pressurize it and the bottle just wants to keep on expanding. So that's one of the best scenarios. We're like, all right, let's go with our type 2 or type 3 valves. We got a big orifice. Let's blast that thing with air really quick, blow it up super fast, and then that way it can stabilize quicker. We can get through the test and it can move on. Especially like with these guys making big, awesome, huge automated machines, they'll be like, okay, you got 0.7 seconds to leak test it. And we're like, man, that's crazy. But they're like, hey, that's what they said. The end users, if you can't do it, they're gonna find someone who can. So that's where we really take pride in that small internal volume I was talking about. We're the only leak tester in the industry that can do a sub 1 second test. Now, it doesn't mean we can do that on every part. It's gotta be small volume. It's gotta be a really rigid test, a rigid part so that you don't have a lot of settle time. B. Braun has had us doing tests on some of their small plastic parts, and it's a 0.7 second total time. It's like they do 0.2 fill, a 0.1 settle time, and a 0.4 second test. And they held us to that 11 years ago. And we've got a handful of testers that are doing 4 at a time, and they've been running like that. They do a test every 0.7 seconds for 11 years now. The testers have hundreds of millions of cycles. So it's a good testimony showing that our testers last a long time, everything works great. But a lot of stuff has to align in order to make that. You have to have the part close, because like say if you put the part right on the tester, yeah, you could do that. There's no volume there. Everything's good. But you go to some places and they're like, well, the part's over here, the tester's here. They got 4 feet of tubing in between it. Now you just quadrupled your volume in your test circuit for no reason whatsoever. Put those together. Just make a leak test fast, get rid of volume, increase your test pressure, or lengthen the time. That's the only 3 things you can do in order to get the sensitivity that you want to see. And no one wants to lengthen the time, that's expensive. So if the line reaches the bottom, that's the number you put in for your decay value. That's what I call the kicker number. So say, if the 10 PSI test on your part, if 1 PSI was the max that you could let decay out of that, the bottom of the screen is a 1 PSI decay. All your good parts will land somewhere in here. If it touches this bottom anywhere, the tester stops, gives you a red light and says leak, we got something's wrong, that way, and then either the PLC grabs the part, throws it in the bucket, or the operator, throws it in the trash, or the other way. If it passed, then this is just the vent coming on that shows the air just dropped out. It actually it's almost usually pretty straight unless you have a real tiny, tiny orifice. But usually, 0.2, 0.3 seconds or so will evacuate a part pretty quick. So this is where the tolerances I was talking about. So say that was 10 PSI and the bottom, you had 0.5. It actually, we'd be, the top line would be 10.5, the bottom line would be 9.5. So long as at the end of the fill step, you're somewhere in that window, you're good. Those same tolerances also follow into the settle step. So say, because remember, between fill to settle, we shut the supply off. So now your part's just sitting there expanding a little bit, or we're getting ready to go in the test mode where we're gonna look really precise for a small leak. But if there's a good enough size hole in that part where the air leaks out of it, why did I do that? If the air leaks out of it and reaches that bottom line in the settle step, the tester knows like, hey, we're not even holding pressure. It flags it as gross leak, red light, get the buzzer, throw the part away, move on. And then this is the reject level, which when you're looking at our actual tester, it'd be at the bottom of the screen. And we zoom in on the test part, because like when you're looking at the screen, say you're at 10 PSI, the line's gonna be right in the middle of the screen. The top of the screen is whatever your plus tolerance was. The bottom of the screen is whatever your minus tolerance was. If we left it like that all the way into the test mode, all your good parts would just draw a line on top of each other across the top of the screen, and it's not realistic. We're like, all our parts aren't exactly the same, and they're not. I mean, you get a couple here and there that you may luck out, but odds are the second, third, fourth digit are all going to be varying a little bit. So once we hit the test portion, the screen automatically zooms in. So the top of the screen is 0 decay, and the bottom of the screen is whatever you put for that limit. So if it reaches that bottom, that's where you get the red light. It says it's got a leak. It's a bad part. And this is what the screen looks like on the tester. So we make it really simple. This is a 4-channel concurrent, happens to be. So if it was only a single channel tester, these would be gone. You'd only have, you know, the one spot right there just for the single channel. And you just tell it, okay, we tell the tester we got 10 PSI. There's our plus and minus tolerance boxes so you don't over pressurize or waste time on a test for a part that's got a huge hole in it. And then the valve on box, that's what we do if you have the manual regulator. So you just touch that box, it opens both valves, air is gonna come right out of the tester. So as soon as you just plug the front of the tester, you can put your finger on it, or if you have a stopcock, you turn it. Now the sensor, that's the last thing in the tester, it sees the pressure. You can fine tune the regulator to be exactly 10 PSI, lock that jam nut down, you know that'll never change, you're good to go. Now you move into your test setup. Excuse me. And you can activate, like this is a 4-channel concurrent, so you can run all 4 channels at once if you want, or you can just run 2. Some people will run like channels 1 and 2 on one program, and then daisy chain that to another program and run channels 3 and 4. It's what we call pacing the operator. So sometimes it takes a bit for the operator to get it loaded. They'll get 2 parts on there, they're running. While those 2 are running, they're getting 2 more parts ready, then they'll put those on, and it'll just kind of run in circles all day long as they keep up until it hits a bad part. Then they stop, and they're like, okay, that's the bad one, throw it in the bin, and then start up again. This is just our fixture timers. So we just do a little clamp valve inside the tester. We can do like multiple ones, and that's if, say your part needs some sort of fixturing, you know, whether, say it's a piece of tubing, you know, and you want to make sure there's no crack in that whole tube, but it's open on both ends. So one end's got to get sealed. So we can put like a radial sealer on one end and then a radial sealer on the other end. One of them will be plugged and the other one has a tube going to the tester. It's got the supply air. So when you hit start, they both clamp around the part and then the test starts, fills it up, does the whole test, and when it's done, they release it. And then we have a built-in function that's called hold on fail, and that's usually right here. They didn't put it in the screenshot. There's a box. So if the part fails, they will not release the part until the operator acknowledges the flashing red light. And that's because operators tend to daydream. And you're sitting there running the same part all day, over thousands of parts. It's just boring, it's monotonous, and usually you're making good parts all the time. So every once in a while, a bad part comes through. If they're just daydreaming or they're just talking, you know, they don't notice it. And they're like, oh, I can't take the part out. Red lights flash. I'm like, oh yeah, it's a bad part. So that way you don't end up getting bad parts thrown in the good bin. And then here's the 5 timers I was, excuse me, talking about: the fill, settle, test time. And this is the decay value. That's what I was calling our kicker number. So in this particular test, it fills for 2 seconds. There's a 2-second settle. And then in the 3 seconds, it's running the actual test time. If the tester sees 0.04 PSI decay out, if it reaches that, stops, red light, give you the buzzer, part's bad, throw it away. Here's the vent time that I was talking about, whether you need it or not. Depends on the application, how much pressure you have in there. And then the little stuff, like there's a fast fill option. Say you had a big part like the size of this desk, but you only want 2 PSI in it. It would take all day to fill that thing up, right? So we have a fast fill option, which would be a secondary valve inside the tester. So say that comes on and it just dumps house air. You got 90 PSI just pouring in that thing. You don't want 90 PSI to fill up the whole thing, but say you ran it for, like this says 4 seconds worth. As soon as you hit start, that valve would open. Full house air pours in it for 4 seconds and then stops. In that big volume, they may equal, 1.8 PSI. You're almost to your 2 PSI part, but you don't want to chance it and go over. So then when that's done, the normal fill time kicks in. That's your regulated pressure that just tops it off at 2 PSI. So that's the little things we do to help, if it's a really big part, to help speed it up, get it up to pressure quickly so you can get through the test and get on to the next part. And you can see like this, it said fill pressure 100 PSI. This means they had 100 PSI of house air coming in. So I would have filled it up a lot higher to get it to that level. How long to test for? That's hard to say. I mean, usually the engineers who came up with the part, they know it better. What's the end use going to be? Like, is the part going to be used for long periods of time? What's it do? Is it trying to hold water out? Like, is it a watch that is just splash proof, or is it a watch that they're going to go diving and they might be 100 feet down? There's a big difference there. So we always ask lots of questions up front. And usually the engineers are like, come on, just give us a quote. It's not that hard. We know what our pressure is going to be. Just give me the ballpark it. And we're like, well, there's a huge difference there, you know, because that could really lengthen your time out, you know, if they're going diving compared to just a splash proof watch. And if they have a cycle time, you might need 3 testers in order to keep up with that, opposed to just 1 tester. So we ask lots of questions so we get everything right and quoted it correctly the first time. So this is, everyone wants to know like the leak rate. And it's not as much nowadays as it used to be, because engineers are getting younger and younger, but we're getting a lot of guys who are like, well, like I said, we made this part, it's got a 2 cc leak rate. That's what it's going to be. And they want us to make a leak standard that will be 2 cc's, or they want a leak standard that will make their part just barely fail at 2 cc's. So if we're going to do that, there's 4 things we need to know. Like, because a lot of times they're like, well, how big of a leak standard do you want us to make you? You know, so that your good part will fail, so you can do a challenge test. And they're like, well, I don't know. But if they have everything set, if they know these 4 things, how long is their test time, the total volume in the whole circuit. Now that's the part, whatever tubing or connections from the part back to our tester plus us. The tester is the 0.8 cc's I was talking about. So you get all that added up together. And then the amount of decay time, what their decay is in minutes, that's the test time, you know, and the unit, and then their atmospheric pressure. With those 4 things, then we just plug it into that equation, and it'll give us the SCCM leak standard that it should be. So what that means is they can run a good part, it passes. If they run that good part again and plug the leak standard in, it'll just barely fail. And now that's the challenge test. So say you do that every morning before the first shift, like, okay, it failed, we know it's good part passes, the part with the leak standard fails, nothing happened last night at the tester, everything's good. If it doesn't, you plug that leak standard in and it passes the part, something's happened. Maybe someone was playing with the screen and got in the calibration the night before, maybe someone adjusted the regulator, someone like in there playing with buttons, whatever the case is, something has changed. Now, if you're doing that every morning, the good thing is, worst case scenario, you only have 1 day of parts in jeopardy. Some people will run for months and months and never do that challenge test. That's where you get into like, oh, we have to issue a recall. That's expensive and that's bad. That'll put companies out of business. So the more often you do that, it is a safety factor. And we have like our customers, like our medical guys who make really expensive medical parts, they'll run that leak standard and verify that every couple hours, every shift change, multiple times a day, just so they never ever get themselves into that situation. So that's the 3 things you always want to remember. What's the end use? What's it going to be used for? And we have some guys like the steel braided catheters, they'll test them at like 750 PSI. We're like, that's crazy. Why are you going so high? But then you'll realize, like say you have a doctor, she's, you know, a smaller lady, and, you know, and she's, you know, pushes on the syringe to inflate a balloon during surgery, and it's really tough, and she slowly gets it in there and maybe sees 100 PSI. And then the next shift, another doctor is doing the same surgery, but he's a bodybuilder, big dude, and he's in a hurry because he's like, the more surgeries I can do, the more money I make. He grabs that syringe, he just hammers that thing. So when he hits that thing with a lot more force, that catheter might see 500-600 PSI because he hit that thing so hard. And it's just going through the tiny, tiny little fill tube down the catheter to the balloon. So that's why they'll test them to make sure that no matter what it sees at the end use, they test beyond that so that they're sure that, hey, it's not going to rip open and, you know, blow an artery out of someone's heart during surgery or kill a patient on the table, something along the lines of that. Is the part keeping liquid in or out? And that goes back to like, hey, they were dunking water, you know, in your question. You know, like, yeah, air bubbles came out of it. Does that mean it's a bad part? Not necessarily. Just because those air bubbles are coming out doesn't mean water is going to get into that. And that's, again, the air versus liquid. A lot of people don't know that. So we just, lay it all out there and make sure they're not throwing good parts away, because that gets very expensive. How long do you vent? That's where I was saying it kind of depends on your pressure. Typically low pressure parts, you don't really have to vent. Let the machine decouple, let the air go off. If you're actually testing like party balloons or something, you'd have a vent time. You'd want to let it all go. Otherwise, as soon as you decouple, the balloon would leave. But again, it depends on the volume and depends on how much pressure is in that part and what's going to happen if you just let go of it. Is it going to take off and leave? So the falling drop of water. So this was, if you get a falling drop of water in 3 minutes, you have about a 1 cc leak. And we always have customers who are trying to get away from doing this. This is the old school way of testing. Well, we fill it up with water, we see if we see drops, or they fill it up with air and throw it in a tank of water, see if they see air bubbles come out. So the way to come out of this, and like especially with the medical guys and even the automotive guys, they're like, okay, we'll go away from the water. It's a lot cleaner. We don't have to clean everything and sterilize it again afterwards. It's not as messy. But you have to prove to us, what's the correlation? Can we still catch the same leak? So what we did with these guys, this is a picture of their part. They would take the catheters and they would pressurize them with 40 psi of water and wait to see if they see a drip come out in 30 seconds. If they did, they knew the leak was big enough that it was a bad part and they'd throw it away. So we took 10 of their parts, we sent them off to Lennox Laser and had like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 size micron holes laser drilled into them. And then we did a pressure decay test on every one. So we're like, okay, with these settings, 2 micron hole decays this, 4 micron hole decays that, blah, blah, blah. Did all that and documented it. And then they took those same 10 parts and put on their hydraulic test and did the exact same test. And they got up to like, micron 6, it was enough where they saw that drop of water form. So they're like, okay, we know this 6 micron hole, that's bad. So they look back at our data with our parameters, a 6 micron hole decayed that much amount. There you go, there's their correlation. So they use our testers, they put that decay amount in the trigger value, and they just run everything through. They were done with water and they test everything 100%. It takes a third of the time, and you don't have the mess. You don't have to re-sterilize everything, and they went away from their water testing. So there's always a way to do the correlation to get back over to show the proof that air tests can beat the old water test. And that's just a graph just showing it. Excuse me. 2 minutes and 25 seconds. It was a 0.855 leak. So this is the test we did with the different size micron holes. Excuse me. And we just did that helped them do their full correlation, because they had to have the study, they have to have proof on it. And then we just did a whole write-up on it, and we just shared that with other customers so they kind of hit the ground running and know how to go about doing the correlation to get away from their water tests. I'm at the tail end of a cold and it's killing me. So why does the volume matter? And that's where I was saying our small internal volume makes it really sensitive. So say you take a thumbtack and you stab a hole in that car tire, you could probably drive the car almost all day long, maybe a couple days, like, it's starting to get a little bit low. But you take that same thumbtack and you stab a hole in a bike tire, you're not gonna get around the block before that thing's flat. So that's the same scenario how our tester is. It's a lot more sensitive with a smaller internal volume. That's why our testers can find that leak much faster and much more repeatable than other manufacturer leak testers that have huge internal volume. So that's a big, big key thing. If you're testing something big, the size of that chair or something, the table, something huge, then it doesn't really matter. But so many of our customers with small parts, they want to test fast. And the only way to do that is having really small internal volume. That's what makes it sensitive. So just an overview of the pressure decay. It just, as the pressure goes up in your time, and then it's not always linear. It always depends on how your part reacts. So your part may slowly be expanding, but once you hit a certain pressure, it may take off on you. Kind of like blowing up a party balloon. The first time you do it, it's really hard. You feel like your lungs are going to blow apart. But if you let the air out and blow it up again, it's a lot easier. So that's just proof of like how easy it is to test something after you've removed the compliance from it. So all parts will react differently. Here's how I was saying to increase the sensitivity. So they're like, hey, we're looking for a 0.25 cc leak, something really small, and we just can't see it. The good parts, you know, are across the line, and the bad parts are really close to it. They need more separation because they're worried about, you know, passing bad parts or failing good parts. The only three things you can do to make that better is, one, you can increase the test pressure. The higher your pressure, that should open up the hole and make you see the decay easier coming out of it. But a lot of times you can't do that. Maybe you go higher pressure, it's going to harm the part. The end use says they won't be able to use it at the end user because you've stretched it, it blew a seal out, whatever the case is. So if you cannot go higher in pressure, the other thing, lengthen your test time out. Because as the part's decaying, you're in your test time, the longer you have, the longer that line will drop. When we were looking at our graph going across. But again, lengthening the time out, time's money. People don't want to lengthen that out either. It's like, we can't do that. Nope, there's no way, because then we're not going to be able to get the parts out. We're not making money. We're not going to do it. The other option, decrease the volume. And that's where I was talking about, you got that big chunk of tubing in there. You don't need that. Move it closer. And we can do stuff to help people, like sometimes at automation line, maybe there's a great big robot there moving the parts. The tester sits behind the robot, and the robot's putting the part in the nest here. It is what it is. You have to get that line over there. Well, instead of having a great big tube going, maybe what we've done, like say that a 1/4 inch line, we'll take some high pressure tubing that has like 16-inch ID line, and we'll feed that inside the line to take up a bunch of the volume. Kill volume anywhere you can, and that'll increase the sensitivity of any pressure decay or vacuum decay test. So it doesn't matter if it's with our tester, any tester in the world. If you can kill the volume out, it'll help you tremendously. So those are one of those three will usually work. Again, you can't change physics. So I mean, you know, if you're testing something with a lot of compliance, that's the only three things you can throw at it. And if it doesn't work, then you just have to go with a longer test time. If you can't make one of those three things work, your next option is add another tester. And that's where you'll see that for big cycle time, sometimes you got 10, 15, maybe 20 leak testers all in a great big automation machine, because that's what it takes in order to keep up with that cycle time. This is just showing a lot of the medical parts that we do. A lot of our slideshows are kind of geared towards all the medical industry, because we probably have 70-80% of the medical market. And the big thing with the small internal volume, it helps them keep up with their fast cycle times. If like the multi-lumens, these guys always want to know about crosstalk. So you got, you know, the end of this catheter, like right there, you have, you know, 4 of those. Each the end of those is tied into one of those small holes inside. So while they're pressurizing one, they want to know if somewhere through that catheter, what if there's a crack in the air or the drug that's going down that one lumen, what if it leaks over to the other one? So maybe they're only giving a little bit of drug when they need to during surgery, but if that's leaking and the other one just got saline going down it, it's always pulling the drug out. You know, so like what if it was like fentanyl or morphine or something that's really bad? They do not want to know about that. So what we do is we have like our 4-channel tester sequentially. We have each one of those would be on a port, and while we're pressurizing one of the ports, the other 3 are open atmosphere. So if any air leaks out of one lumen into the other lumen in the catheter, it goes right back up to the tester and goes out the valve to atmosphere, and we see it as a huge leak. So the crosstalk check is huge for the medical guys. They always want to know that. And we're starting to see more of it in the automotive industry as well. You know, they might make a cover for an intake manifold, and like this is, you know, one side's intake air, one side's exhaust air. Obviously they don't want crosstalk. So then it's the same theory. Just have bigger valves, pressurize one side. If we see a leak on the other, then you know it's bad. There's crosstalk where there's not supposed to be. Oh, went 2 of them. This is just showing different parts, different stuff we do in the medical side of it. A lot of stuff has a little balloon. So this whole thing would fill up quick. No matter what your pressure is, it's real small volume. But once it fills up, that little balloon is good. That's all kinds of your compliance. So like, okay, no, it fills up in half a second. Why do we have to test for 5 seconds? because once you blew that thing up, this balloon opened up and now the balloon's stretching. So until that thing stops moving, you're not going to be able to see a small leak to make sure like that bond was good, or if they put that tip on there correct, or if there's a leak on that bond. So there's a lot of little different stuff that you may not know. Even if the part is like in a solid hard plastic housing, there could be like a real soft gasket or a soft O-ring on the inside that's moving. And that's where you go back, you see the graph. So like, oh, we threw 2-second fill time in there, and then we got to settle time, the line was just crashing. You're like, man, maybe we're making parts bad right out of the gate. Every part's bad. If you're not sure, double your fill time, just for the hell of it. Try it. You had nothing to lose, right? So you double your fill time, and now the test got so much better, then you know, like, hey, we're just chasing compliance. Our parts are good. We don't have holes in them. We're doing our job. We just have compliance. We're just chasing physics. It is what it is. So there's little tricks you can always do before, like, you don't have to go back to the drawing board or go in the R&D room and punch the guy in the face because he doesn't know what he's doing. It could be a good part still. So little stuff like that is good to know. IV sets, again, like there's a lot of the medical stuff, but there's so many bond, like that's bonded, that's got to be a seal, that's a seal. Usually it runs through the wheel to make sure they don't kink that. There's another seal there. The cap's got to be a seal. So there's just so many different stuff that you have to test. And then there's, you know, if that drip chamber, if that's made of soft material, might as well be a balloon. You know, so you're right back there chasing your tail on something that's expanding. So when in doubt, just add numbers. Just make the test really long so you know that, okay, here's good parts, here's bad parts, and then you can start chipping away at the timers and speed everything up and see how it goes from there. Just more of the components. Little stuff like this, that's like where we can do like the sub 1 second test. There's no volume there. That thing's not going to stretch. You just blast it with air real fast. You could basically skip your settle time and get right to test time and see if that thing's going to leak or not. So that's really the fun stuff in our wheelhouse where we can really test fast. And those parts are the ones that come off automation that are trying to do 200,000 parts a day, stuff like that. It's crazy, but it's definitely doable. Just more of the, like nowadays, everything's going like the needleless injection ports. So, you know, so there's a machine out there that's running and it's got a bunch of stuff in it just like that. I think it's one of our customers. And yeah, just, you know, little different small plastic stuff. It doesn't mean we can't do big automotive stuff either. It's just we do a lot of the medical stuff. That's what our sheets are filled with. blood bags, IV bags. There's so many bags nowadays because they just make them for all kinds of different surgeries. That's like blowing up the big balloon. So if you end up with some sort of application like that, we just have what we call a toaster slot. We make a real simple fixture. It's aluminum plates. We line porous material in the middle of them, and you throw that bag in between it. So now when you blow it up, it can't when you put pressure and it can't blow up all day. It only goes as far as those plates hold it. Because typically you're just checking this weld. And you want to make sure that the bag's sealed good around those ports. But just in case there is a pinhole right in the center of that bag, that's why we put the porous material in there. So either way, the tester will see it. You can make that test really fast to get through it all.
Porous material, you mean like a foam pad or something to squeeze the pad in between everything?
Yeah, it's kind of like that. It looks like foam. We order sheets of it from Porex. It's a company that makes it, and it's just there's air flows right through it, but it's like an open cell foam, basically what it is. Yep. And you can do that, or you can actually engrave it, kind of like in a honeycomb. As long as there's some path for air to get the atmosphere, that's all you need. This is just showing the pacemakers. We do a lot of testing on stuff like that. The pacemaker kind of goes back to like a sealed chamber test because you can't drill a hole in the pacemaker and fill it up with air on the inside. So we just surround it with air. If it disappears, there's some sort of seal or leak in the pacemaker. There's just a few pictures of different stuff. A lot of cell phones. Like all this stuff is all chamber tests nowadays because they're all waterproof. There's no way to get air inside them. Automotive's going the same way. Headlights, taillights nowadays. You're not changing the bulb. Be back into the neighbor's car and crack the taillight. You're throwing the whole damn thing away and buying a new expensive one. That's what they want. And the only way to test them, same thing, doing a big chamber test. There's no way to get air inside them. And I think that's it. You guys have any questions? Anything like applications you guys have going or anything?
Is there standard standard that kind of defines what waterproof means? Like you have to not leak a certain amount and then you can say it's waterproof?
Yeah, there's like IP65, IP67. There's different ones. So those ratings are like, if you drop it in a puddle, that's not gonna like water go into it, or it could go through a car wash. And then you go to like the IP68, it's like, okay, it can go in 3 meters of water for 30 minutes and it's not gonna allow water into it. So as the number goes up, it's a more stringent test you have to do on it. So typically it'd be a higher pressure test or a longer test to ensure that water wouldn't be able to get into it. Like a watch that you can dive at 100 feet, that's gonna be like an IP69 or 72. There's a whole level of them. So it all depends on what the end, and that's what goes back to, what's the end use? Yep, what are they gonna use it for? Yep. And if any of you guys have anything, like if you guys are all local, the other guy who's at our booth, he's the local guy, he handles this area. He can always swing by and see and bring demo testers or whatnot. If you're in a different area, we got reps all over the country, or if you happen to be in a spot where we don't have a rep, I can mail you a tester, whatever's easier, so.
It's really helpful. The one you talk about has a laser cutting hose to coordinate the liquid limit. I think that was really helpful.
Okay, yep. And I have all that in, we have like the third-party system, or a third-party correlation. Like they came in, did a study that proved like our small internal volume will help. You can test twice as fast as like competitor stuff, with their testers, because they got twice as much volume. So we have a lot of that data we can share with you. So yeah, if any of you guys want any info, I have a sheet up here where you can just like a name and email, or if you don't have a business card or whatever, and we can just send you some info and I can put you in touch with a local rep or do whatever you need, so. Yeah, and like I said, we got our stuff set up in the booth out there. The orange boxes, so you can go play with the tester. We got one of each model there and one of our pumps. So if you want to come play with it, feel free. So,
Sounds good.
all right, thanks guys, appreciate it.